I can't explain it. I had always prided myself on being the perfect wife and mother. My days were a seamless routine of school drop-offs, grocery runs, PTA meetings, and ensuring that my husband, Brian, and our 2 children had everything they needed. Life was predictable, steady, and in many ways exactly what I had always wanted, or so I thought. Then I met Daniel. It started innocently enough. Daniel was the father of one of my son's classmates, newly transferred to our school district after a divorce. He was charming in a quiet way, always showing up early to school functions, volunteering for bake sales, and offering to help whenever needed. At first, I only saw him as another helpful parent, someone equally invested in making the school a better place. But then, I began to notice the way he looked at me, how his eyes lingered a little too long when we spoke, how his compliments carried an undertone I tried to ignore. It had been years since anyone looked at me like that. One afternoon, after a particularly long PTA meeting, we found ourselves the last 2 people in the room. The conversation shifted from school projects to personal life, and before I knew it, I was telling him about my routine, about how sometimes I felt like just a wife and mother instead of my own person. Daniel listened intently, nodding, understanding in a way that felt foreign and intoxicating. "I get it," he said softly. "It's easy to lose yourself when you're always putting everyone else first."
By the way, if you're curious about what happened next, subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Thank you.
The words hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just the sentiment, it was the way he said it, like he saw straight through me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. As I drove home that evening, I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly conversation, but deep down I knew that something had shifted, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it. The following days passed in a blur of routine, but something had changed. I found myself thinking about Daniel more than I should, replaying our conversation in my head, the way his voice had wrapped around me like something warm and familiar. At home, Brian remained the same, steady, predictable, loving in his own quiet way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped too close to something dangerous, something intoxicating. At the next PTA meeting, I told myself I wouldn't seek Daniel out. I even avoided sitting near him, but it didn't matter. The moment our eyes met across the room, my pulse quickened. After the meeting, as I gathered my things, he lingered near the door waiting. "Hey," he said, his voice low, casual, but there was something else beneath it. "Do you have a minute?" I hesitated, but nodded, stepping aside as the last few parents filtered out. "I wanted to say, I really enjoyed talking the other day," he continued, his hands slipping into his pockets. "I hope I didn't overstep. It's nice to talk to someone who understands." I should have brushed it off, should have walked away, but instead I found myself smiling, my own fingers gripping the strap of my purse a little too tightly. "No, it's fine," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I enjoyed it too. The moment stretched between us, the air thick with something unsaid. Then he glanced at his watch and exhaled, as if breaking whatever had been building between us. "I should get going, but maybe we could grab a coffee sometime, just as friends, of course." My breath caught in my throat. It was a simple offer, but we both knew it was, and yet before I could stop myself, I nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." That night, as I lay beside Brian, the sound of his breathing filling the dark room, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just coffee, just a harmless conversation, but deep down I knew better. I had already stepped too close to the edge, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to pull myself back. The morning of our coffee meeting, I told myself it was nothing, just 2 parents talking, nothing more, and yet as I got dressed, I paid a little more attention to how I looked. A touch of mascara, a hint of perfume, small details, ones that Brian rarely noticed anymore. I pushed the guilt aside and reminded myself that this wasn't a betrayal, not yet. When I arrived at the cafe, Daniel was already there, sitting at a small table near the window. He smiled when he saw me, and just like that, the unease in my stomach melted into something warmer. "Glad you made it," he said, pushing a cup toward me. "I got your usual." I blinked in surprise. "How did you?" He shrugged, grinning. "I pay attention." The conversation flowed easily, too easily. We talked about the kids, the school, our frustrations with the endless PTA obligations. But then the conversation deepened, slipping into more personal territory. He told me about his divorce, how lonely it had been adjusting to a life without the presence of a partner. And I in turn found myself admitting things I never thought I would, how stagnant my marriage felt, how I sometimes felt invisible in my own home. His hand brushed against mine as he reached for his coffee, a fleeting touch, but it sent a shiver up my spine. I should have pulled away. Instead, I let it linger for a second too long before retracting my hand. The look in his eyes told me he noticed. The coffee shop felt smaller, the air heavier. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled, leaning back slightly. I don't want to complicate things for you, he said, his voice careful, measured. I swallowed hard, gripping my cup. I know. And yet, as I walked back to my car, my fingers still tingling from his touch, I realized that complication was already inevitable. The line between harmless and dangerous had blurred, and I had willingly stepped across it. The days following our coffee meeting felt different, as if a shift had taken place beneath the surface of my life. I went about my routine as usual, packing lunches, attending PTA meetings, sitting across from Brian at dinner, but a part of me remained elsewhere, caught in the memory of Daniel's touch, his words, the unspoken tension between us. I told myself I wouldn't see him again outside of school events. It was a one-time thing, a fleeting moment of connection, nothing more. But that resolve crumbled the moment I saw his name flash across my phone screen. Thinking about you, the message read, simple but loaded with meaning. My pulse quickened, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I should ignore it. I should put my phone down and walk away. Instead, I found myself typing, "Me too." That small admission was all it took to set everything in motion. The next time we saw each other at school, there was a new undercurrent to our interactions. Our gazes lingered, our conversations carried hidden meaning. Every touch, no matter how slight, felt electric. When he suggested another coffee meetup, I didn't hesitate before saying yes. This time when we met, there was no pretense. We both knew why we were there, why we kept coming back to this. The conversation didn't dance around the edges of what we felt. Instead, it dove straight in. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice lower, almost cautious. I know this is dangerous, but I don't want to stop. I exhaled, my hands gripping my cup as if it could somehow ground me. I don't either. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could remind myself of the life I was jeopardizing. When he reached across the table and took my hand, I didn't pull away. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't something I could just walk away from anymore. The days turned into weeks, and what had started as stolen glances and secret messages evolved into something neither of us could deny. We found ways to see each other, carving out moments in between school events and errands, always careful, always aware of the risk. But the risk only made it more thrilling. One afternoon, while running what should have been a routine grocery trip, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I glanced at the screen and saw his name. Meet me, just for a little while. My heart pounded as I hesitated, then quickly typed back, where? Minutes later, I pulled into a quiet park on the other side of town, my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I told myself I was just here to talk, just to make sure we weren't getting carried away. But when I saw Daniel waiting for me by the trees, his expression unreadable yet filled with something that sent a shiver down my spine, I knew that was a lie. We sat on a bench, the space between us filled with unsaid words. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This is getting harder to ignore, he admitted, voice low. I think about you all the time. I want more time with you. I swallowed, my throat dry. I know, I whispered, but we can't. His hand found mine, warm and steady, and despite everything, I let him hold it. Then why are we here? He asked gently. I didn't have an answer, or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. The wind rustled the leaves, the sound filling the silence between us. My life had been so carefully constructed, each piece placed exactly where it should be. But now, sitting here with him, I felt the cracks forming beneath the surface. And part of me wondered, was I really ready to stop this, or was it already too late? The days blurred together, each moment with Daniel pulling me further from the life I had built. We continued to steal moments where we could, our meetings growing bolder, the risks greater. The thrill of secrecy outweighed the guilt for now, but I knew it couldn't last forever. One evening, after another rushed goodbye, I arrived home to find Brian sitting at the kitchen table, his fingers tapping against his coffee mug. His eyes met mine, searching, weary. Where were you? He asked, his voice casual, but I could hear the undercurrent of suspicion. I hesitated, then forced a smile. Grocery store, ran late, ran into some other PTA moms. The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I forced them out anyway. Brian didn't question it further, but I saw the doubt lingering in his eyes. It was only a matter of time before he started to piece things together, and yet the thought of stopping Daniel, felt impossible. The next afternoon, Daniel and I met again, this time in the back corner of a quiet cafe. This is getting dangerous, I admitted, my fingers curled around my cup. Brian's noticing things. Daniel exhaled, leaning forward, his gaze intense. Then maybe we stop sneaking around, maybe we stop pretending this is just some mistake. His words sent a jolt through me. This had always been something temporary, something I convinced myself I could walk away from. But could I? Did I even want to? I looked away, my heart pounding. It's not that simple. It could be, he said softly, if you let it. The idea settled between us, heavy and unspoken. My life had been carefully curated, a safe and predictable existence. But now, standing at the edge of a decision I could never take back, I realized that no matter which way I turned, something would break. The only question was, what was I willing to lose? The tension at home grew thicker with each passing day. Brian wasn't asking direct questions yet, but his silences stretched longer, his glances lingered, and the weight of his unspoken suspicions pressed down on me like a vice. I told myself I could keep everything together, that I could manage both lives without one seeping into the other. But the cracks were widening, and I could feel it all slipping through my fingers. Daniel, on the other hand, had become more insistent. "Julie, we can't keep doing this forever," he said one afternoon, his voice edged with frustration. "I need to know what this means to you, because for me, it's not just an escape." I stared at him across the small cafe table, my stomach twisting. I wanted to give him an answer, something concrete, something that would make sense of everything. But how could I when I didn't even know what I wanted? My life with Brian was safe, stable, built over years of compromise and love in its own quiet way. But with Daniel, I felt alive, seen, desired, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like just a mother, just a wife. I felt like myself. "I don't have an answer yet," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I don't want to stop seeing you, I can't." His jaw tensed, but he nodded, accepting my half-truth for now. "Then we have to be careful." But no matter how careful we were, the unraveling had already begun. That evening, as I stood in the kitchen stirring a pot of pasta, Brian walked in and leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Who is he?" The words were calm, measured, but they struck me harder than if he had yelled. My hand froze mid-stir. "What?" "You're distracted all the time, you come home late, you're different, Julie, so just tell me, who is he?" The room closed in around me, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment I had feared, the moment I knew was coming, and yet faced with it I had no idea what I was going to say. The weight of Brian's question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to diffuse the situation without shattering everything I had left. "There's no one," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, but he didn't look convinced. Brian exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I don't believe you, Julie. I know you. I see the way you check your phone when you think I'm not looking, the way you avoid me. Just tell me the truth." I gripped the spoon in my hand like it could somehow anchor me, but the words wouldn't come. If I lied again, he'd see right through it. If I told the truth, everything would be over. "It's complicated," I finally muttered, my voice barely above a whisper. His expression hardened. "That's not an answer. Either there is someone or there is." I turned away, staring at the bubbling pot on the stove, as if I could will myself into another reality, one where this confrontation wasn't happening. But I had already stepped too far, and Brian wasn't going to let this go. "Is it him?" he asked, his voice quieter now but sharper, more precise. "Daniel, the guy from the PTA." My breath caught in my throat. The fact that he had a name, his name, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I turned to look at him, to deny it, to say something, anything, but my silence spoke louder than words. Brian's jaw clenched, and for a long moment he didn't move. Then he nodded, his expression unreadable. "I see." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, the smell of overcooked pasta filling the air, my entire world crumbling around me. I should have felt relief that the secret was finally out, but all I felt was the cold, crushing weight of what I had just lost. Brian didn't come home that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched dinner, the house eerily quiet except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. The weight of my choices pressed down on me like a stone, suffocating and unrelenting. I reached for my phone more times than I could count, my fingers hovering over Daniel's name. He had texted earlier, just a simple, "Are you okay?" But I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I? Everything was spiraling out of control, and I had no idea how to stop it. The next morning, Brian's absence was impossible to ignore. The kids noticed, their questions innocent but piercing. "Where, Dad?" my son asked over cereal, his voice laced with confusion. "Did he have to work early?" I forced a smile, pretending to sip my coffee. "Yeah, something like that." But as the hours passed and he still didn't return my calls, panic set in. I had broken something that might not be fixable, and for the first time, the full weight of my actions hit me like a tidal wave. By the afternoon, I finally received a message from Brian. "We need to talk, be home soon." My stomach twisted as I read the words, knowing that whatever was coming next would determine everything. I had wanted a change, something new, something that made me feel alive again. But now, staring at my reflection in the darkened screen of my phone, I wondered if I had only managed to destroy everything that truly mattered. Brian came home just as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with fading light. I stood in the kitchen, my hands gripping the counter, waiting for him to walk through the door. When he did, his expression was unreadable, his movements slow and deliberate as he set his keys down on the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick, charged with everything we had left unsaid. Finally, he exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "We can't keep pretending, Julie." My throat tightened. "I know." He leaned against the table, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on me. "So what now? Do you want to fix this, or are you already gone?" Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I don't know how to fix this," I admitted. "I don't even know if it can be fixed." Brian nodded as if he had already expected that answer. "I deserve the truth. Do you love him?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Did I love Daniel, or had I just loved what he made me feel? The thrill, the attention, the way he reminded me of the person I used to be before life became so predictable. Brian's jaw tightened as he watched me struggle to respond. He sighed heavily and shook his head. "That's all I needed to know." I reached for him instinctively, but he stepped back. "I need space, Julie. I need to figure out if I can live with this, if I even want to try." Panic surged through me. "Brian, please." "No," he cut me off, his voice steady but final. "You wanted something different. Now you have to decide if it was worth it." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the dimly lit kitchen, my whole world unraveling around me. And for the first time, I didn't know what I wanted anymore.
Thank you for watching the video. If you want to hear more stories, subscribe to the channel and like the video. Videos are released every day. Good luck to everyone.